almost busted in Laredo, but for reasons that I'd rather not disclose.
I smoke pot, and I like it a lot. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer to use than alcohol. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting responsible marijuana smokers in America. And to learn what you can do to help, please contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
The show was long and we were just sitting there, and we'd come to play and not just for the ride.
And distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular audio podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, normalaudiostash.com. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. Welcome back to the Audio Stash this Monday. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. Just visit NORML.org. Stay tuned this week for special coverage Wednesday and Thursday of the 35th anniversary of the 1972 National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse. This commission and the impact of President Nixon dismissing the recommendations made on marijuana really are the starting point for the modern situation of senseless prohibition. The commission is also known as the Schaefer Commission after its head Republican Raymond Schaefer. They had recommended that marijuana be decriminalized and that it be moved out of the Class 1 drug category. But President Nixon and his staff decided to do otherwise, and in a single step heralded in the modern era of arresting hundreds of thousands of American citizens for their choice in using an intoxicant less harmful than alcohol or tobacco. We'll hear audio from President Nixon himself from the Nixon tapes, as well as interviews we conducted with Dr. Tom Ungerleider, Keith Strupp, and NORML staff discussing this very important moment in American marijuana history. That's Wednesday and Thursday this week, right here on the Audio Stash. Next up today, we have news from NORML, including an interview right from the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court. Our news today: bong hits for Jesus arguments heard by Supreme Court. Today, the United States Supreme Court hears oral arguments on the first major case involving students' rights to free speech in almost 20 years. The dispute began when Joseph Frederick, then 18, stood across the street from his Alaska high school as the 2002 Winter Olympic torch passed by in parade. As cheerleaders cheered and the school band played, Frederick opened a paper banner proclaiming, quote, "Bong hits for Jesus," close quote, as he stood on the public sidewalk. Principal Deborah Moore saw the banner, asked Frederick to take it down, and when he refused, took the banner herself and crumpled it up. Morse then suspended Frederick for 5 days because she said the banner advocated or promoted illegal drug use in violation of school policy. His suspension was increased to 10 days when Frederick quoted Thomas Jefferson. His family took the suspension to court, where it was litigated up to the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The appellate court then ruled that the school was liable for suppressing Frederick's First Amendment rights and even found the principal liable for damages as well. While Frederick openly concedes his banner was created to be humorous and made to draw the attention of TV cameras covering the Olympic torch, not about marijuana, the case is now being argued in terms of the boundaries between the students' constitutional free speech rights and the power of school officials to enforce drug prohibition policies. The Supreme Court has decided differently in specific student free speech cases. The most famous is the 1969 ruling that involves students who wore black armbands to school to protest the Vietnam War. That ruling included a catchphrase being used by Frederick's lawyer in the media, that students do not, quote, shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate, close quote. But more recently, student free speech has not been supported in specific scenarios by the U.S. Supreme Court, who ruled in 1986 that a student does not have a free speech right to give a sexually suggestive speech at an assembly, and in 1988 that school newspapers can be censored. The core argument for the school district being voiced today by infamous conservative attorney Kenneth Starr is that the school's drug prohibition agenda is paramount to students' rights to free speech, and that the banner itself was promoting illegal drug use. But the students' lawyers, supported by the ACLU, say that just because a statement is being made about something that is currently illegal does not put the freedom of that expression into question. The case could have broad implications for students' ability to express themselves and participate in debates on national policy. Joining us today from the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court is the Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Chris Crane. Chris, welcome back to the Audio Stash today.
Thanks for having me back.
Thank you, Chris, for taking time to speak with us on location today. Chris, you're there at the Supreme Court with students expressing their free speech today on this topic. Tell us why this case is so important.
This is a case that's about the rights of students to talk honestly and openly about drugs and drug policy in schools. And what the school district is arguing in this case is that administrators or principals or teachers should have the right to punish students for any speech that could be gleaned to be making a positive statement about drug use or drugs, or could undermine a school's zero tolerance policy. So that would mean that if a student mentioned that their grandmother has cancer and uses medical marijuana, or that they just want to challenge their school's random drug testing program, that they can be punished simply for that speech.
And as SSDP heard from students around the country asking specifically about this case?
Well, not only we heard from students around the country, we actually flew in students from all over the country to the Supreme Court today to have a presence outside the court to show that there is massive student opposition to this case, or to overturning the Ninth Circuit decision in this case. So we've got students here today who've come out from Michigan. We've got a couple students from South Dakota who were involved in a lawsuit themselves for promoting a medical marijuana initiative in their school in South Dakota. We've got some students from the D.C. area who are here. The students were supposed to come up from Clearwater, Florida. Unfortunately, because of weather-related incidents, their flight was canceled. But we had interest from other students from all over the country as well who we simply couldn't afford to fly out. So, there's a great deal of support for this from students all over the country, and we're very, very hopeful that the Supreme Court does the right thing.
And, Chris, what kind of impact is marijuana prohibition having on students today in general?
Our drug policies in this country impact young people as much as anyone else in the country. If you look at the number of marijuana arrests in this country, the people who are arrested for marijuana overwhelmingly are young, or between the ages really of 15 and 28 years old. But more importantly, there are policies that are directly impact or directly targeted at young people and even high school students. And those are things like random student drug testing programs in public high schools. We were talking about things like the Office of National Drug Control Policy's Youth Anti-Drug Media Campaign, where these sort of marijuana propaganda ads that are directly targeted at young people. And what we're saying with this case is that there are policies that there are drug war policies, marijuana policies that directly target young people, and that young people young people's rights to challenge and debate and discuss these policies should be protected speech.
And Chris, tell us about the atmosphere there on the steps of the Supreme Court today, and some of the students who are there with you.
Well, it's been a terrific vibe out here. We had about 40 or 50 students throughout the day protesting outside the Supreme Court. We unfurled a huge banner that said "Free Speech for Students," looked very much like the original banner in this case, and then a lot of smaller individual placards that said "Free Speech for Students." And these students who were out here stood out literally all day. They got here at about 8:45 in the morning, and they're just rolling up the banners and putting everything away now. And so they've shown real dedication to this issue, and the atmosphere has been terrific. It's been covered by basically every media outlet in the country. We actually just did a live shot right now with Fox News. There were interviews done with NBC, with CBS, with CNN, the Associated Press, Channel 1 News, and just about every major media outlet in the country was out here covering this case. And they saw all of these high school students out in front of the court showing their support for this case, and they came in and did interviews with these students. So these are students that are mostly high school students. There are some college students that came out to show solidarity. Just an example, there are a couple kids who came out from South Dakota, and these are kids who just not that long ago wore shirts that said it was something like "Vote Yes" on I think it was Proposition 4, I believe it was called, and that was a medical marijuana initiative that was on the ballot last year in South Dakota. And they wore these shirts that were basically in support of the initiative. They did have a marijuana leaf on the shirt, and the students were suspended from school for wearing these shirts because they said it promoted drug use. And they actually sued and won. And so they came all the way out from South Dakota on a very, very long, tough flight schedule just because they thought it was important to be here and show their support and their solidarity for Joseph Frederick and the people involved in this case.
Well, Chris, it was wonderful to hear from you today, and thanks again for taking time to speak with us.
Thank you very, very much, and I hope if anyone else is interested in finding out a little bit more about this, they can check out our website, schoolsnotprisons.com.
Chris Crane is the Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. He joined us today by phone from the steps of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. No More Babylon with Freedom here on the Audio Stash. We have links to them at normalaudiostash.com. Next up today, we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Andrew Golub on his new research looking at the racial disparity of marijuana arrests in New York City. Dr. Golub and his colleagues at the National Research and Development Institutes in New York City found that both African Americans and Hispanics are arrested at higher rates than whites and also receive harsher sentences regarding marijuana prohibition offenses. Dr. Golub, thanks again for joining us here today on NORML's Daily Audio Stash. Something very interesting about this arrest data in New York City was that in 1 year, those marijuana in public view arrests accounted for 98% of all marijuana possession arrests. So basically, unless you were smoking pot in public, there was little chance of getting arrested for minor possession in New York City that year.
That is correct. And one of the other factors that this analysis is only looking at arrest data, so we don't know for certain, but an awful large number of the arrests for smoking marijuana in public view have been made by the New York City Housing Police, who are responsible for patrolling low-income housing projects. So if you are in the lobby of a low-income housing project smoking marijuana, you can be arrested. Whereas if you are in the lobby of your private fee-for-service housing project, apartment building, smoking marijuana, the police need to show probable cause, and they could at most charge you with a violation, but not a criminal offense. And poor folks have less access to private locations where they can do behaviors that are restricted through the legal code. So they have less opportunity. Wealthier people can order their marijuana through a delivery service and smoke it in their apartment and never risk more than a violation. Whereas if you purchase your marijuana in public, if you smoke it in public, you are at risk of misdemeanor charges.
So it sounds like people with low income just cannot buy the same privacy others enjoy in the city. Also, the data suggested that men are arrested for these marijuana offenses at much higher rates than women. So, Doctor, if you are a black or Hispanic man in New York City and you are seen to be smoking pot in public, what happens to you?
Okay. And there's discretion at every stage of the system, but what typically happens is if you are charged, you will be handcuffed and brought to Manhattan Central Booking. If you're in Manhattan, you'll be brought to the borough's central booking facility, where you will be put in a holding facility with perhaps as many as 20 or 30 other people and held for up to 24 hours until an arraignment judge has an opportunity to see you, at which point they will discuss the nature and merits of your case. They may set up a future time for a trial, or they may dismiss the case completely at that point. And if convicted, you face a additional possibility of going to jail, which had been rather low but is increasing. It had been as low as about 4% actually spending additional time in jail right around the year 2000. It's up to 8% if you are black. Your chances of going to jail, you have an 8% chance of being sent to jail for smoking marijuana in public view if charged. So you can spend additional time in jail, and you will have this added to your criminal record. If you do not have a criminal record, then subsequent to this, you will have one. And similarly, I don't know if this is good or bad news. It's tricky as to what one makes of it, but the harshness in recent years has been across the board by race. White folks who were arrested for smoking marijuana in public view had a 1% chance of being sentenced to jail time prior to the year 2006. In 2006, the risk of being sentenced to additional jail time if charged with smoking marijuana in public view is 5%.
Dr. Golub, you and your colleagues do make some recommendations based on this data analysis. So tell us what you think would mitigate this detrimental impact of marijuana prohibition on people of color in New York City.
We really strongly recommend taking stock of what the NYPD is wishing to achieve. And we hold open the idea that civility in public space may be an important and essential goal. And we hold that as a constraint to our analysis. But we secondarily, or at least based upon our findings, look at the issue of improving race relations, of reducing the disproportionate impact being felt by blacks and Hispanics, presumably in low-income areas. So we make a few recommendations as to how to address this additional burden. And one of the keys is that whenever the police talk about getting tough on this minor offense, it falls heavily on communities, on black and Hispanic communities. So we strongly talk about focusing not so much on getting tough, but on focusing on why this policy is being implemented. And our first recommendation is to reduce the intensity of MPV patrolling, primarily to New York City's highly public locations, such as in Lower Manhattan, Central Park, and the Transit Authority. Now, looking at the distribution of where arrests for smoking marijuana in public view have been occurring suggests that if they limit their focus to these highly public locations, where perhaps new norms of civility have taken root, that arrests for this charge would go away, and this would greatly reduce the burden on blacks and Hispanics. Our second recommendation is to consider, instead of arresting these individuals, which is a particularly onerous procedural activity for the individual being taken in, go back to giving desk appearance tickets, which were popular back in the 80s and into the 1990s. And as part of quality of life policing, desk appearance tickets were ruled out because they became mockingly known as disappearance tickets. People were not paying attention. You'd say, you have been charged with smoking marijuana in public view and need to appear before an arraignment judge next month. And people would say, right, and drop it in the garbage can, and they'd never hear from these people. This is less of an issue today. The NYPD has really advanced its ability to track all forms of crimes and violations and the individuals involved. So one advance is taking a palm print instead of these fingerprints, which makes it easier to track these people. So if somebody were to not show up, they could be tracked down, or if they did come through the system again and there were a warrant against them, they could then be held accountable the second time. And so in this manner, repeat violators would be found, and those individuals could be given harsher treatment than people who simply come into the system at the time of arrest. So those were the first two recommendations. We then raise the question, and this is beyond the NYPD's discretion, but we raise it for the legislature, that maybe smoking marijuana in public view should be reduced to a violation as opposed to a misdemeanor, consistent with laws regarding alcohol use, that being in public or versus being in private doesn't make a difference. It's how one behaves beyond the substances in their bodies that leaves them subject The same crime, smoking a marijuana joint, in private is a violation, but in public it's a misdemeanor. This is inconsistent with the laws for other offense. If you assault an individual, it does not matter whether that assault occurred in public or private. It is still a criminal offense. So there is an inconsistency in the law, and our third recommendation is that the legislature consider reducing the penalty associated with smoking a small amount of marijuana in public to a misdemeanor, to a violation. And our last concern is out of deference to the demanding goals and responsibilities facing the New York City Police Department, and the seriousness of maintaining public order and keeping crime down. And we strongly recommend monitoring the extent of explicitly monitoring the extent of smoking marijuana in public view. How much of it is really going on? And with these reductions in the harshness with which smoking marijuana in public view is treated, we hold that monitoring would let us know whether these reductions led to an increase of smoking marijuana in public view and whether additional criminal justice sanctions, additional police enforcement is really necessary in order to maintain the civility that New York City Police Department is striving to achieve. So those are the four recommendations that we drew from our findings here.
And Doctor, let me ask that broader question now, because your paper makes those recommendations to improve race relations. Is there a sense that marijuana prohibition in general is inherently intertwined with the question of racism in this country and the issues of race relations in places like New York City, and that a change on these policies is really the one area that would do the most to immediately benefit race relations in urban environments around the country especially?
Drug policy has always been confounded with other complex objectives and agendas out there. And it's not just about personal liberties and whether personal liberties extend to the pursuit of altered states of consciousness, but there's been issues of which groups of individuals are being addressed by police enforcement. And so our focus is that it's important to separate the policy, that if this policy is about reducing smoking marijuana in public view, to keep the focus on that and to avoid the appearance that this is a racist policy and that it's being disproportionately targeting poor ethnic minorities. And the other issue that's going on here, and it's a larger issue that's out there, is it's also combined with, and there's been a major change in the practice of medicine in this country, and we've had much more involvement, co-diagnosis, and co-development of one's practice, one's treatment for disease, and people are much more involved in choosing. And this is a larger question surrounding the use of marijuana that's being addressed through the medical marijuana initiatives around the country. But that's us, so we have these three activities going on, and it's hard to tell whether we are dealing with quality of life, whether we are dealing with racism, or whether we are dealing with medicine. And it's important to maintain clarity in one's programs. And when it emerges, such as in this case, that the program is having a heavy burden and has been for at least 10 years, having a disproportionate burden on poor ethnic minority communities, this should be addressed. This should be taken seriously. It's disappointing that the New York City Police Department hasn't been focusing on this and hasn't been seeking to address this situation prior to this analysis emerging. And it's quite remarkable that the impact, the disproportionate impact, emerged back in the mid-1990s. This has been going on for 10 years now.
And Dr. Golub, I want to thank you again for taking time to join us here on the Audio Stash and highlight this truly important data.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Andrew Golub is with the National Research and Development Institutes in New York City, where he investigated the disproportionate impact of marijuana prohibition arrests on people of color. We have links for more information on this topic at normalaudiostash.com. You've been listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Make sure you visit our website at normalaudiostash.com. That's NORMLAUDIOSTASH.com for more information about every day's show. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow. Podcasting technology of NORML is made possible by Red Aphid Interactive Media. More information at redapphid.com.